Okay, welcome everybody to Carbohydrates 101. I'll just skim through this introduction really fast. So I'm Paige. I think I've had a chance to meet most of you guys, but just in case you forgot anything, I am the performance dietitian at our facility. I'm also a distance runner, so I'm training for the New York City virtual marathon this year, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm a new dog mom. I've got my puppy Daisy sleeping over there. She's pretty cute. You can see her down in this corner here. And my nutrition philosophy is that, nutrition is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So take what you want from this presentation and apply it to your own diet however you like. And nutrition should be sustainable too. So, hopefully that these practices I share with you are things that you can apply to your diet long-term, and that, will ultimately improve your performance or how you feel, your energy throughout the day without sacrificing your quality of life. Hopefully, you're enjoying the foods that you're eating, you're spending time with friends and family, enjoying the foods that you love, and you feel good about what you're eating, right? So today I want to cover, we're gonna put on our little, maybe high school chemistry hats for a second. We won't get too deep into it, I promise. But it is important to understand a little bit about the structure and how we classify carbs based on their structure. So you can use, the principles when making decision about what kind of carbohydrates you want to have in your diet. We'll cover how our bodies use them, how much we need, what happens when we eat too little or too much, and then we'll quickly cover low-carb diets too. So this is where you guys can press your space bar and just, shout out what comes to mind when you think about carbohydrates. Maybe it's your favorite type of carbohydrate or an adjective to describe them. So just give me a quick word really fast.
Bread.
Red?
I was going to say pasta.
Bread, yeah.
Oh, bread. I thought you said red, like the color. Okay.
No, bread.
Okay, bread, pasta.
Bread.
Bad.
What'd you say, Moses?
Bad.
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 Yeah. Especially in the fitness industry, you can get a bad rep. So cool. We'll talk about bread, pasta, and why people.
Pina coladas.
What?
Pina coladas.
Pina coladas. Are you making one tonight or tomorrow? TGIF.
I only drink them on Tuesdays with my tacos.
Oh, that's fun. Not margaritas?
No, those are too strong for Kevin.
Okay, cool. So these are some good words for me to go off of here, and I think all of your responses are totally on point with what most people think about carbohydrates. Here's just some quick little comics I threw together to kind of encompass what a lot of people think about them. For instance, some people are like, I don't even know what an example of a carbohydrate is. Is butter a carb? Maybe some of you guys have gone on a low carb diet before. Maybe you had some episodes where you couldn't help yourself and you broke into the chips and the candy, or you ate a wall. Maybe you've heard a little bit about complex carbs or simple carbohydrates. So we'll dive into all of that today. So where can we find carbs in our diet? You guys kind of hit the nail on the head with the first one, grains and grain products. So things like bread and pasta. We can also find carbohydrates in fruits and vegetables. I think vegetables is one that a lot of people forget about. We can get carbs from nuts and seeds, legumes. So think about things like lentils or beans. And then some dairy products like yogurt, milk, cottage cheese, ice cream, that sort of thing. Can you guys see yourself here? Can you see the whole screen?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's just me that can see you then. Okay, so what do carbs do for us? They're our body's preferred source of fuel or energy. So, they give us the energy to grow, especially when we're young. Repair, so, if you're recovering from injury, they can be really helpful. Of course, they're gonna help us move and just function in general. And then a lot of carbohydrate-rich foods are also a really good source of things like vitamins and minerals, good source of fiber, and then phytonutrients. So think about things like antioxidants. Okay, so here's where we're gonna go into a quick little bit of chemistry. So go ahead and put your little thinking caps on here. So there are 3 ways that we categorize carbohydrates. The first way is simple sugar. So this is going to be like the most broken down form of carbohydrates. You can see right here, this is what it looks like. It's a little, we make it a little hexagonal shape. So the most basic form, it's called a monosaccharide. Maybe you've seen or heard of some of these types of monosaccharides before: glucose, fructose, galactose. And then we have disaccharides, which we also classify as a simple sugar, which is basically 2 of these monosaccharides fused together. So if you have a Latin background, maybe you can say, oh, mono means 1, di means 2. So yeah, so disaccharides, you have things like sucrose, that's a table sugar, and that's glucose and fructose combined. Maybe you're also familiar with lactose, which is the sugar found in dairy products, and that is a combination of glucose and galactose. So yeah, these are the simplest forms of carbohydrates. You can find these types of carbohydrates in things like the sugar in fruits and vegetables, right? That's often found in fructose, or that's found as fructose. Table sugar, like I mentioned earlier, in sweeteners like maple syrup, honey, agave, lactose, as I mentioned earlier. And then when you're looking at the ingredient labels for like packaged goods, if you see the word ose, or anything that ends in ose, that probably means that it's some kind of sweetener which has simple sugars in it. So that's something to look out for. Next, we move on to complex carbs. So these are just long strands of those monosaccharides. And you can see here, we can use our Latin again. Poly means many, so we have polysaccharides. And we split them up into 2 categories. We've got starches, which is found in like, that's what we think of really when we think of carbohydrates. That's the bread, the pasta, the potatoes, right? And then fiber. So speaking of fiber, fiber is a type of complex carb, but we kind of categorize it as its own type of carbohydrate because it's a carb that we can't digest as humans. It typically just runs right through us. By the way, we're going to talk about poop here, so get ready to be a little uncomfy. We definitely want fiber in our diet because there are 2 types and they do 2 different, or they have 2 like important functions. Soluble fiber, think of that as like a big globby like boogeyman trying to fit through a small hallway. He's not going to get through there very fast, right? So soluble fiber, it's soluble, it absorbs water and it creates a gel-like substance. And that's good because, you know, if you think of the slime man going through the hallway, that's kind of what it turns our stool into in our digestive tract. So it's moving very slowly through our digestive tract, which is good. You'll learn why in a second, why slow absorption it can be a good thing. It's also important because it can help absorb cholesterol. So if cholesterol is an issue for you, that's why your doctors recommend, you know, adding things like oats or, you know, eating Cheerios in your diet because those are good sources of soluble fiber. Soluble fiber is also food for bacteria. We want, you know, good types of bacteria in our gut. Maybe you're like familiar with probiotics and all that. So, you know, it can help feed those little guys, help with digestion. So sources, like I mentioned earlier, oats, chia seeds. I think these are really good examples for soluble fiber because what happens when you add water to these things? Chia seeds, they turn into a gel, right? That's how we get chia pudding. Oats, you know, if you add hot water to them, eventually they kind of gel up and they create this gloppy kind of substance. And then apples and black beans contain soluble fiber as well. And there's a whole list of foods. Typically, like, you know, plant foods, they contain both types of fiber, but some will contain more than others. So then we get to insoluble fiber. So if you want a really good poop, you definitely want to make sure that you're eating good types of soluble fiber because that's what serves as the bulk in your poop. That's going to help get things moving through. So that's good. It's going to prevent constipation, and it's also going to help prevent colon cancer because things are moving through. They're not just sitting and kind of fermenting in your gut. So, and again, they can also be used as food for bacteria. So I think wheat bran and nuts are good examples of insoluble fiber because think about like you know, just substance that it's not gonna, how do I explain this? Like you can almost see how it can add bulk, right? Like think about wheat bran, it's like, it's kind of tough. The skin, like, you know, think about almonds, the skin that they're in are also kind of tough. It's really just gonna help bulk up everything. All right, and then yeah, potato, like the skin on potatoes, same idea. Any questions so far about fiber or monosaccharides, disaccharides, anything like that?
I just have a quick question. So potatoes, is that also, does it matter if they're red potatoes or white potatoes?
Well, that's a good question. I think maybe the amounts of fiber and the types of fiber can change in them, but it's probably not going to be that big of a difference. I tell people, like, you know, you don't have to eat only sweet potatoes. White potatoes, red potatoes are also going to be good sources of vitamins and minerals and fiber and all that good stuff. Good question. Okay, so that was the chemistry part. We're going to move on. Hopefully you guys can take what you learned from there to talk about digestion. So quick overview of carbohydrate digestion. Basically, we have our type of carbohydrate, whether it's, you know, a simple sugar or a complex carb. We're going to eat it. Our bodies are going to break it down into those monosaccharides. And then we can either use those as energy in our body, or we can store them. I hope you understand I put them in like a little box here. We can store them and use them for energy later on. And there are two hormones that are involved with this. Maybe you've heard of them before, insulin and glucagon. They both help regulate the amount of monosaccharides, or I'll refer to them as blood sugar from now on. They regulate how much blood sugar is circulating through our body. We don't want too much, we don't want too little, so they help kind of have this homeostasis, or they maintain the correct amount to help our body function optimally. So insulin's role is, it is released when there's a rise in blood sugar. So our body, as you know, after we finish a meal, our body will notice that we have, you know, more sugar in our blood because we've digested the carbohydrates, and it says, hey, let's release insulin. So what insulin does is it tells our cells to take in those carbohydrates or those simple sugars and use them as energy or store them. And so let's say, you know, like we eat breakfast, insulin's released, we are able to absorb that blood sugar. Then, you know, 4 hours later, blood sugar is starting to drop a little bit because it's been used for energy. So that's when glucagon is going to be released, because our body's like, hey, we need some more blood sugar. So glucagon tells our cells to release the sugar back into the blood so that it can circulate and be used around the body. So we definitely want both of these hormones working well for carbohydrate digestion. 1 second, I'm gonna move you guys here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the digestion of simple sugars. What I want you to take away from this is that it's pretty easy to digest simple sugars. They're almost immediately absorbed in our body and used for energy or stored for energy. And they also cause a greater rise in insulin. So typically we see a spike in blood sugar because it's absorbed really quickly into the body. So a bunch of you know, glucose or sugar is released into the blood. So we have this spike, and that's when insulin's like, oh, okay, boom, I'm coming to kind of help regulate that curve or make it less steep in the body. On the other hand, with complex carbohydrates, that steep curve is going to be way more flat and even when we eat complex carbs, because it takes more time to break them down in the body. Right? If you remember, we have to go from these long chains to these simple units. So this takes time, and that slows that spike so that we have steadier blood sugar levels. Our insulin isn't being like as released as, or it's not this huge spike, right? And this is good. We definitely want steadier blood sugar levels in the body. Now we'll move on to kind of like what happens when we eat too much or too little. So when we eat too many carbohydrates, when we eat too many carbohydrates, what our body does with them is they store them in our muscles and our liver. And that stored form of carbohydrate is something that's known as glycogen. Maybe you've heard of that before. So when those stores become too full, there's nowhere else to put the carbohydrates. That's when they are stored in the body as fat or as triglycerides in fat cells. And this usually occurs in a calorie surplus in the body. If we're not getting enough carbs, let's say like you haven't eaten all day, you're getting pretty low on blood sugar, or maybe you're going on like a low carb diet. In the short term, our body is going to dip into those glycogen stores, those stored forms of carbohydrates, use those for energy. In the long term, when we run out of those glycogen stores, that's when our body is going to dip into our fat cells and use fat for energy. So that is known as ketosis. So that's where like the keto diet comes from. And then also, this is something we don't want to happen, is our bodies can dip into the protein stores in our muscle and use that for energy. But we definitely don't want to dip into protein stores in our muscle. We want to preserve as much muscle mass as possible because it's so great, not only for helping us stay strong and healthy, but over time we lose muscle mass. So we want to definitely preserve it. Okay, so you guys are probably thinking, okay, so I don't want to get too many carbohydrates in my diet. I don't want to get too little. How many carbohydrates should I be aiming for every single day? The answer is it's an individual, like case-by-case basis, but what you can take away from this is the USDA recommends that about 45 to 65% of our total daily calories are coming from carbohydrates. So that's a pretty big sliding scale. Some people feel good on the lower end of that scale. Some people feel much better when they're towards the higher end of that scale. So that's something you can kind of play around with and decide what feels best for you. And again, I'm here to help kind of pinpoint where you think you should be. The recommendations also say to aim for half of your grains to be whole grains. So, think about the things like bread, pasta, rice. You want to try to go for the whole grain, whole wheat varieties. So whole grain English muffins, pancakes, bread, pasta. If you're going to make rice, try to make it brown rice most of the time. And, if that's something you're not doing now and it seems pretty scary to do that, like you're not really a big fan of whole grains, maybe just try adding small amounts. Like for rice, for instance, you can do like a 1-to-4 ratio, eventually move it up to 1-to-2, and then maybe eventually you can just be doing all brown rice. And then, as I mentioned earlier, your fruits and vegetables, legumes, those are all going to be counting towards your carbohydrate intake. So definitely try to aim for a fair amount of fruits and vegetable servings throughout the day to try to get 5 to 10 servings throughout the day. And here's an example of what a typical day can look like to help you meet your carbohydrate needs. For breakfast, you can do something like avocado egg toast on whole wheat bread with some fresh berries. If you want to have a mid-morning snack, you can do apple and peanut butter. Lunch would be a burrito bowl. You got some brown rice in there, some fajita vegetables. Snack, carrots and hummus. And then dinner, you could do barley, which is a type of whole grain, with some steamed broccoli. Okay, I'm sure many of you guys were thinking about sugar at some point during this presentation, because we're talking about things like sweeteners and table sugars. This is definitely something we want to address when we're talking about carbohydrates, because as a society, we do get a lot of sugar in our diet. It's found in all different types of places. Sometimes it can even be like hidden in things like sauces and salad dressings. So let's talk about what we can do to limit our excess sugar in the diet. The reasons why we want to limit it is because it's linked with diseases. It's linked with obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. So because of this, the dietary guidelines say, hey, try to aim for less than 10% of your calories. Try to make them less than 10% of your calories should come from added sugar. So added sugar, that's not necessarily the type of sugar that's found in like fruits and vegetables and naturally occurring plant foods. It's the kind of sugar that is added into our food. So typically you're going to find it in a lot of like processed foods. soda, sweetened beverages, like Starbucks Frappuccinos, granola, cereal products. As I mentioned earlier, like barbecue sauce, ketchup, salad dressing. In a lot of packaged foods, you can find added sugar. So the American Heart Association recommends that men aim for less than 36 grams in their diet. This is kind of a number you can check on the back of your nutrition labels and see how that adds up throughout the day. And then for women, it's going to be 25 grams. So, I mean, looking at that, I think a typical can of Coke has about 30 grams of sugar. So you can see how easy it is to go over your limit throughout the day. And I just want to like say too, I'm not saying, you know, you can never have dessert or chocolate cake or have your favorite Starbucks drink. I definitely am a sweet tooth, so I feel you guys on that one. But you know, like it is something to be more mindful of, just, you know, during your day when you are making most of your food choices. So here's some tips to limit sugar. You can kind of see there's some swaps here. So for instance, if you're doing like a sugary pumpkin spice latte, Starbucks just came out with that drink, right? Maybe what you can do is, you know, some people, like, they're fine with just doing unsweetened coffee and tea, maybe adding a little bit of milk, a little dash of cinnamon. My tip is if you're used to drinking really sugary, like Starbucks beverages, maybe instead of, you know, the 4 pumps that come in your mocha sauce, ask for 2 or 1, or just, you know, slowly try to cut back on that. Let's see some other examples here. In the types of foods that you're preparing yourself. So, okay, for instance, syrup, like when you're making yourself pancakes, instead of maybe drizzling a ton of syrup on your pancakes, you can cut back a little bit and you can experiment with other toppings. So you can do fresh fruit, you can do some yogurt, some spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, to kind of get that natural sweetness in your pancakes. Other tips when you're making yourself a fruit smoothie, try to use water or milk instead of juice, because juice is basically just straight up simple sugars, whereas with water, you know, you're not getting any sugar, and with milk you're getting a little bit of protein and fat in there to slow digestion a little bit. And let's say, you know, like you want to enjoy a donut. Ideally, you know, you don't want to enjoy like a whole box of donuts, or even like 3 donuts. It's best to kind of just, you know, have moderation in mind. So if you want to pair like a donut with a source of protein, fat, and fiber, an easy example is, hey, have your donut, but maybe have it with some eggs and some fresh fruit, so that you're going to feel more satiated from that meal and you won't be as inclined to eat that whole entire box of donuts. Okay, now let's move on to the low carb craze. Let me look at your faces here for a second. Have any of you guys ever tried a low carb diet before?
Yeah.
Okay, how did it go for you?
It worked really well
Uh-huh.
for the term, but my cholesterol shot up. Like,
Oh yeah, okay.
so I kind of got off of it, but I mean, for that short term, it worked. I lost a lot of weight and got into shape, but like you said,
I remember that.
it's not very sustainable.
Yeah, and for some people it can be, but yeah, for others it can definitely be an issue, especially if you love having carbohydrates in your diet. So yeah, I'll kind of talk about the pros and cons of like the keto diet here. It can have some benefits. I'm not here to demonize anybody who, you know, follows this type of diet. It can be positive for people who have neurological disorders. So think about people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, MS. It can help reduce cholesterol, obviously not with everybody, right? And help those with diabetes manage their blood sugar. Obviously, a lot of people who follow low carb diets, especially at the beginning, see rapid weight loss, partially because of ketosis, right? But then also, you know, you're having these really high protein, high fat diets, you're feeling really full, you're gonna have a reduced appetite, maybe you won't be taking in as many calories as you were before. And then also, if you remember how I was talking about glycogen, the stored form of carbohydrate, glycogen binds a lot of water. So when we dip into those glycogen stores for energy, we're getting rid of a lot of water weight. So that's why, like, you know, people doing keto for the first 1 or 2 weeks, that's why they're seeing like 7 pounds of weight loss, boom, just like that, because it's mostly water weight. Some cons of the keto diet I think are important to be aware of is that it can be difficult to maintain, like you were saying. You know, you might not have as many options, although I will say, if I go on Facebook, I see so many ads for like keto-friendly products. So the market is definitely increasing for people interested in this diet. It might get in like the way of your lifestyle. Maybe you're a really social eater, you like eating with your friends, right? Or you like having this particular type of food. It can kind of put a damper on that. You know, if you're someone who's like an endurance athlete, I probably wouldn't, keto diet wouldn't be the first thing I would recommend to you, just because we use carbohydrates so much as endurance athletes. Or if you're like someone who's super active, you know, maybe reconsider doing this type of diet. It can be really restrictive. Any type of diet, like whether it's keto, whether it's vegan, whether it's, you know, Whole30, they can feel very restrictive to some people, and that's where we'll see kind of like this cycle of restrict, restrict, restrict. I can't take this anymore. I just want to have a donut. So I binge on donuts. I feel guilty. I go, you know, I try to reel it back in, and like this cycle of basically yo-yo dieting continues. Restrictive diets, of course, can also lead to disordered eating. So that's something to be aware of, whether it's anorexia or orthorexia, where you're obsessed with, you know, clean eating, binge eating are all things to be aware of. And then there are some health risks, you know, like the keto diet, I think has been around since like the 1930s. It was originally created or like thought of to help people with epilepsy. So it hasn't been around that long, and it's, you know, increasing a lot in popularity. There are more studies coming out, but it's not something that we've studied for the general population like extensively. So, so, you know, we're still figuring out the pros and cons and what it means for people's health. But right now we do know from research, one second, that it can cause some issues sometimes. So it can lead to constipation or like, you know, bloating, any kind of GI issue, diarrhea, that kind of thing. High cholesterol, like you mentioned, and then mineral deficiencies. So think about things like vitamin D and calcium. People following a keto diet or really any restricted diet put themselves at risk for not getting enough vitamins and minerals in their diet. So my 2 cents when it comes to low carb diets is it's usually not the first thing I would recommend. Like if you came to me and you were looking to lose weight, I would say, okay, like this is something we can consider, but let's maybe explore some other options, kind of just based on you, your lifestyle, your preferences. And if you're looking to improve your athletic performance, like I would definitely try to maybe steer you away, just because it hasn't really been shown to help with athletic performance. And then the other reasons for why I'm not a huge fan is just because it has those restricted eating patterns, which from my own personal experience can lead to reduced quality of life. Because, you know, I'm human. I've tried, you know, low carb diets before myself. And also it cuts out some really nutritious and tasty foods. Like sometimes people can have fruits on these types of diets. Sometimes they can have legumes, but you can't have as much as you may want. And they're just so gosh darn tasty. Like I can't imagine never having pasta again, or, you know, a nice bowl of cereal at the end of the day. So not to say it's not something that you absolutely can't try, and it's not something I would work on you with, but those are my big reasons for why it's not usually the first thing I recommend. And then also there's tons of research to show that a balanced diet, which includes carbs, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, they can help with weight loss. They can just support being healthy, and they can support, you know, living a long, healthy life, and then also athletic performance. So yeah, but at the end of the day, the best diet is the one that doesn't ruin your overall quality of life. You feel good while you're following it. You don't feel like you're being too restrictive. You feel your best. You've got lots of energy during the day and in your workouts. And it's something you can do for a long period of time. So that's all I have for you today with Carbohydrates 101. Hopefully that was kind of a good introduction. You're more than welcome to email me if you have any specific questions, or if you want some resources to learn more. I'd be happy to share with you guys. So, we got any questions?